So the next section, it's called the person and the Russian-Ukrainian war, and the session will be chaired by Mykhailo Honchar. So please let me pass the floor to you. Good afternoon, good evening, dear colleagues. Well, I'm very happy to have this conference. That's already the third day of the Shevchenko conference. Wonderful briefings, and hopefully our section, together with the colleagues, will be just the same interesting as it was before. So we'll have four briefings. I will start with the briefing on with the report um, on the topic of motivation for teachers is collaboration in the context of the Russian occupation of Ukrainian territories. Just a couple of words. I am a candidate of science in pedagogics. I work as an associate professor in the Kherson Academy, and I research the history of state supervision in the field of education, and the challenges of the war has prompted a new interest. I researched the collaborators on the occupied territories, and I'm trying to make this to prove that Russian aggression has a considerable ideological um, solid grounds. And also we'll have a briefing by Larysa Yakymova to save the plant and worker stories and analysis of business relocation from war-torn regions. And she's a PhD in economics, associate professor at the Chernivtsi National University, named after Yuriy Fedkovych. And currently, Larysa participates in a research project from humanitarian assistance to the assistance in the development. Then we'll have a briefing by Janusz Panchenko on the use of Roma theme in the context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And he's a Ukrainian researcher with Roman roots, and he specializes on the research of Roma. He researches their traditional culture, dialects, and activity in south of Ukraine. And he has done a lot of researches already in terms of the impact of Russia on many different cultures. And he is about to receive a PhD in Zaporizhia National University. And the last but not the least is Nataliia Zalietok, PhD in history, senior researcher and head of the Department of Archival Affairs of the Ukrainian Research Institute of Archival Affairs and Record Keeping. And she works primarily with the history of UK, Soviet Union, gender history, and Ukrainian studies. And she compares the policy of UK and Soviet Union on the female use in the war. And we also have a PhD of the Kherson National University of Mykhailo. So allow me to start our blog with my own statement. That is the motivation to collaboration in the context of Russian occupation of Ukrainian territories. I would like to extend words of gratitude to the Indiana University, to Sarah, to all those who participated in the organization of this project on the scholarship for Ukrainian soldiers, which not only supports us in difficult times, but also gives us the opportunity to establish professional communication with the American and Ukrainian academic community. I hope there will be a time for us to meet face to face, not online, and to share our scientific achievements in a peaceful environment. And today is the 731st day, in fact, of Russian full-scale invasion. And as a citizen of Ukraine, I would like to take this opportunity and express my gratitude to American people, once again, who have stood up by us in these difficult times and helped us to counter Russian aggression. Throughout the entire period of Russia's armed aggression, which has resulted in temporary occupation of a part of Ukraine's territory, Russia has been actively using education in order to create comprehensive pro-Russian worldview. And it's been working with the content of education in occupied territories blurring and forming a new identity of Ukraine among young people. In this process, the occupation authorities attach an important role to Ukrainian educators who remained in the temporarily occupied territories and agreed to cooperate, since the involvement of educators in cooperation plays an important role in the policy of Russian occupation regime. I've identified a separate phenomenon of Russian-Ukrainian war as an educational collaborationism. This slide shows I gave the definition of this phenomena. It's kind of voluntary cooperation with the occupation administration of experts, professionally involved in the organization and functioning of education and training systems within the institutional activities and educational institutions of various types. And currently, mostly the lawyers are researching that because they are not defining the types of collaborators. And therefore, they consider collaborationist of teachers as a political or cultural aspect. Still, there is a clear understanding of a special subjectivity of the educational workers and the policy of Russian occupational authorities. And I will try to identify the factors influencing the teachers to agree to voluntary cooperation with the Russian occupying forces. And I've analyzed a lot of materials in order to define the work of the teachers. And also I had the materials of focus groups and different other materials. I have come up with several factors of collaborationist activity. That's adaptation, mimicry, the desire, to adapt to new geopolitical realities. I mean, these people don't have any ideological motives. They simply want to continue live on the same territory and they don't care about the flag or the state. And here I would like to show you some of the examples of teachers. A 48-year-old Olha, an English teacher at Kakhovka School number 6 in Kherson region, who agreed to work as an English teacher at local school on number 5, and which the occupational administration planned to kind of open. And she simply wanted to stay on the same position. And according to her acquaintances, collaboration for her was just an opportunity to keep the job and a stable income without any career aspirations. As the security situation in Kakhovka deteriorated in October, Olha left through a safe corridor through Ukraine to Norway, and she was granted refugee status, is now working as a translator. Then, Maria Yezhakovska, the principal or the headmaster of Mariupol Gymnasium number 27. She said, some people sincerely support Russia, but the majority is simply adapting to the circumstances. Some people are held together by the grabs of their relatives, others by their property. One more quote. I know a teacher in the occupied Luhansk region who says, I dream of returning to Ukraine. She works and stays there by force because she simply doesn't have money to leave. And she says, even if they put me in jail in Ukraine for working here, I'm ready to serve that time, to serve this, but I want to return to Ukraine. So you can see these difficulties. The next factor is the material benefit, because At first, Russians were offering high salaries, could be 280 to 400 to 500 US dollars, even though in the other regions of Russia, the salary was, well, was something around 273 to $291. And under condition of the economic suffering, all those subsidies from the Russian budget are a temporary phenomenon, as evidenced by constant reports of delays in the payment of salaries to public sector employees on the on the occupied territories. And I would like to say that Ukrainian government clearly understands the problem of financial instability of our teachers on the temporarily occupied territories, and there is some support, monthly support. It's a small one, something around $150. Well, let's say part of the salary, even though it's a small money, but still it gives some confidence to those people remaining on the occupied territories and the assurances that there will be changes. I would like to quote one more. The state supported us. They paid us less than before the Great War, but they paid us, says a teacher of Kherson school, Angela Volobuyeva. So, if there was no money at all, I could understand. A person collaborates with the enemy to survive, to support himself and his family, but the state pays the money, so it was just agreed. Yes, it was very scary, but we were not threatened with weapons. People just wanted to grab a fatter piece or a bigger piece of the pie. The next factor, that's the career progression or the possibility of career progression. For
Михайло,
those who didn't have a possibility like that before.
I'm
Михайло,
sorry to
Михайло,
interrupt. Did you mean to be
я про...
advancing your slides? Ви хотіли слайди показати, чи...
Так я показую їх, а що, ви їх не бачите?
Ну, ми бачимо один слайд тільки.
We can see only one slide. It says career, right?
Ні.
Because I can see the slide career. No, we can see the second slide yet. We can see the slide called educational collaborationist. What about now? Now the slides are moving. Good. And now you can see the career, right?
Так, перепрошую.
Yes. Now we do see the career. Oh, I apologize. So the next factor is the opportunity to have a career progression for those people who did have the possibilities during the Ukrainian government. And here's an example of a 37-year-old Svetlana who agreed to cooperate with the occupational administration of Kherson, and she became the headmaster of the school. And she had no leadership qualities, but since she had some acquaintances among the leaders of occupational administration, she received an offer. At the same time, the school staff, most of them, did not support the newly appointed principal and did not follow the path of collaborationists. Then there is ideological collaborationists, meaning the perception of Russia as a powerful state and Russians as a fraternal people. This phenomenon includes resentment and our hatred of Ukraine and everything Ukrainian. An important component of this resentment is an outright rejection of the Ukrainian language, ignoring the mandatory use of the state language in the educational process. And the most horrible thing for me is the situation when we can observe such phenomena on the government-controlled territory of Ukraine and a constant of shellings. Just recently we had some scandals with teachers in Odessa, in Dnipro, and some other cities. So it's very hard to understand what the people are thinking of. I mean, are they really waiting for this Russian world to come? There's an example of 66-year-old math teacher from Berislav, Kherson region. And before the full-scale invasion, she did not actively express her pro-Russian views, but had a complex personality that caused some tension. with colleagues and students. And since the beginning of the occupation in March 2022, she actively involved in preparation of an illegal referendum on accession of Kherson region to Russia, heading the relevant election committee. And when the occupation administration offered her the opportunity to lead and open a school in Berislav, she agreed, but was unable to recruit Ukrainian teachers who refused to cooperate. The next factor, that's satisfaction, meaning people who previously had some problems with the Ukrainian government because of law or other cases. There was Ihor, for example, a 50-year-old Ihor, who was found guilty of corruption by a court of law, and therefore he lost his position. And after the full-scale invasion, he agreed to become the headmaster of the school. So he agreed to that. I would like to point out that each of these factors can be intertwined with others, and in many cases they can support one another. For example, there's a 53-year-old Irina, who was born in Nizhny Tagil, Russia. She graduated Kherson Pedagogical Institute. She worked for some time as an English teacher in Kakhovka. Then she moved to Portugal, returned, did some business. She was selling Portuguese shoes, but at the same time she was a supporter of Communist Party of Ukraine, which is prohibited now. And after the temporary occupation of the region, she joined the occupation administration, agreed to head the educational department in Kakhovka.
So those motives are rather interesting. So finally, I'd like to share some of the responses of focus group participants from among teachers, which was taking place online in November 2023 with the Zaporizhia Regional Institute for Teacher Development. Like these quotes: if a person consciously cooperated, that's among teachers, if a person consciously cooperated, they will never change their mind. Even if they remain in the deoccupied territory when Ukraine comes here, such people can be distinguished from those who were forced to go to work. We know of cases when there was nothing to eat in the occupied territories, when small children stayed behind because there was no money to go somewhere else. And there are people who were forced to work, and there are those who left consciously. One more quote. A teacher is a person who leads children, who shapes their worldview. A person can go to work as someone else, but not as a teacher. A teacher cannot be someone who has betrayed their country. Another quote. They, the collaborator teachers, have no right to work in a school. We are not only teaching children, we are educating them. We are upbringing them. And what can they educate? And there are multiple examples like that. The understanding or misunderstanding why our colleagues decided to become collaborators. There are lots of examples like that, and we still need to research that, because I would say everything is really individual and needs legal, first of all, and moral interpretation of the behavior of our teachers under occupation in these existential challenges. I was trying to be as short as possible. I thank you for your attention. Let us go on with the work of our section. And I give the floor now to Larysa Yakymova to Save the Plant and Workers, Stories and Analysis of Business Relocation from War-Torn Regions. Dear colleagues, please stick to the time limits, 15 minutes. Miss Larysa Yakymova. Okay, thank you. Okay, first and foremost, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers, the initiators of this wonderful program, the course, and also the conference, because I have an opportunity for the second year in a row to report about my academic researches, the results, the outcomes of these researches. So my new topic is to save the plant and workers, stories and analysis of business relocation from war-torn regions. So, Russian aggression has forced people and businesses to leave their homes. 840 companies have moved to safer regions of Ukraine under the relocation program. So, to collect the stories of relocations, to analyze them, to share and to use this experience is the objective of this research. So, as for the methods which were used, through the limitations of the war, the oral stories are connected with the analysis of the documents. That is, narrative and structured interviews which were published at the internet resources with the representatives of the relocated enterprises, regional military administrations, and local self-governing authorities. As for the sample, we used a convenient, option. The final selection is 80 enterprises. The results of the research will be considered looking at the example by stages of enterprise relocation. So the first stage is making a decision and searching for new locations. The main reason as of the decision to relocate is named that there is danger to employees and destruction of production. 48 companies. 1 in 4 companies mentioned either occupation or proximity to the area of active hostilities, and 9 enterprises said risk of occupation. That is, 29 enterprises a priori don't want to cooperate with the occupational authorities. So, the decision is taken to relocate, in fact. But was there a relocation plan developed in advance? No, we did not believe in it, so we had no plans to move before the first day of the invasion. That was the answer of approximately 68% of respondents, entrepreneurs. 25% were partially prepared, that is, at the level started withdrawing cash in 2 weeks, filled full tanks, and so on. And only 8% said that they had a plan developed in advance. But even those for whom this was already the plan, as we can see in Foxtrot company, how the executive director of this chain added, this plan was needed to be adjusted to reflect the real scale of the invasion. It is hard to make a slideshow now. Okay, so there was no program of relocation in the government as well. As the representative of the Transcarpathian Regional Military Administration recalls. Just a moment. It's hard to read the text. I don't see it. So how he recalls, it was all done by phone. They would call and say, find me an area, find me a warehouse. It was unsystematic mutual aid. It was only in mid-March that the government developed the enterprise relocation program and later an online platform. And everything worked like a system. The entrepreneur specified the requirements. Then the business support departments got involved and a dialogue was held. As it was mentioned by the representative of the relocated enterprise, we received calls from literally every region. How did entrepreneurs choose a new location? First and foremost is convenient logistics. For some, proximity to the EU borders. For others, central regions. Because, as they say, you can get anywhere in one day. It's interesting to mention that 18% of respondents indicated understanding with local authorities regarding the location of production and housing for their employees. As for the type of relocation, 54% of enterprises have made a full relocation. The rest partial or mixed. That is, opening a new unit with the relocation of part of the staff. It is obvious that entrepreneurs chose the type of relocation based on their own judgments about the course of the war and the possibilities of transporting their equipment. The next stage, relocation, is physically and psychologically challenging. What was the most difficult or scary? Preparing to move under fire and close combat. Evacuating under fire. Dangerous, difficult, and long journey. It was difficult to organize transport. It was difficult to dismantle and load equipment. But 13% of businesses said that there was no transportation as such, as everything here was started from scratch, and 21% of entrepreneurs did not share their experiences and avoided this topic. As for the most painful topic, that is, in fact, relocation of the staff, we have the following results. I don't see them, but still I'll try to. So, first, the founders of the relocated company say, for us, the main asset is not the equipment, but the team. However, only 2.5% of companies relocated almost all of their staff with their families. And about half of the companies moved less than 10% of their employees. It is difficult to persuade your employees to leave their homes to move together with the enterprise. This is how the director of Neverduck recalls it. I wanted to move production out even before the war, when there was talk of a possible invasion. But the employees did not want to leave. They did not believe that the war would start. And when the war started, they did not want to leave because they did not understand where to go. So, at first, the company's management had to find a place of relocation, take photos and videos of where they would work and live, and demonstrate all the conditions to the employees. Only then did they say, okay, we are ready. Of course, there are many personal reasons to refuse to relocate with your company. But the last message on the slide, which I don't see, confirms the findings of previous studies, that the decision to evacuate is dependent on the level of education. As for the management and engineers, 99% of them moved with the company to Vінниця city, while only 15% of the staff agreed to leave Kharkiv region together with the plant. As for the equipment, only 22% of enterprises managed to do this in full. Larysa, you have 2 minutes left. Why did it happen like that? So first of all, 60% of the enterprises took a decision about partial or mixed relocation. Three following main answers were: we did not have enough time because the territory was occupied. And also really big equipment, which was difficult to transport and disassemble. Physical loss of the equipment because of the shelling. How did they transport that? 21% of the enterprises were able to transport their equipment and property by Ukrainian railways and by the tracks of Ukrposhta, Ukrainian post office, for free under the relocation program. 8% did that on their own, but they got compensation for that. As the director of conduct said, not all of that, only 75%, but still it's a really huge amount. And 74% of the companies had not received compensation at the time of the interview because of different reasons. What? Because of different reasons. Where am I? Oh, here. What are the reasons? What is happening with my presentation? Hey, Larysa, could you please make your conclusions? So how you will see how they transported. Then they moved finally.
Вирішив проблеми
So
безпекові.
the relocation resolved the security problems, and then when the recovery in the new locations, that prompted a new problem. The main challenge was to gather a team, because, well, the western areas were not industrial, so finding the employees with the proper level of qualification was very difficult, according to the interpreters. That was also the reason for the well, there was also problems with the infrastructure, with the warehouses, industrial facilities, and the problem of tuning the equipment. Well, it required a lot of efforts to resolve. The others were kind of national problems under conditions of the full-scale war. The war has taught people and businesses to find opportunities in change, to do things they wouldn't be doing before. Because, well, earlier we would be repairing the mine equipment. After relocation, we kind of changed the area of our operation and started to providing utility services. And we have nothing but brand and part of the personnel. Now, in order not to lose that, he went to the competitors to ask to agree and to lend some of their capacities to start the production, well, to recover the production of the Chumak products. Larysa, well, the timing, unfortunately, is a challenge. You've already used 3 extra minutes, so the timing. We will have a Q&A session, so maybe you'll complement later on. Well, in this case, I will simply tell about maybe the one final slide that now there's a lot of conversations whether the refugees will return to Ukraine and who will recover the destroyed Ukraine. I would like to say that only 22% of the companies are planning to stay in the new location completely. The rest are planning to return to their hometown and to recover that. This includes Severodonetsk, Mariupol, and in Kharkiv, people are saying that they will be constructing the underground factory, but we will work in Kharkiv and pay taxes Well, thank you for the attention, and I apologize for the problems. Well, everything happens. Then we'll have Nataliia Zaliotova. So please, Nataliia Zalietok. Nataliia Zalietok. I'm sorry. I apologize. I have to apologize. So I will switch to English now. No,
презентацію.
at first
Так,
I will
секундочку.
share my presentation, so sorry for that.
Так. Чи видно, як переключаються слайди?
Can you see the slides changing?
Ну, треба тільки на загальну демонстрацію виставити.
Well, you need to start the demonstration of this slide at first.
Я бачу, у мене теж тут є проблеми технічного характеру.
Ні,
Ну,
що
взагалі,
у вас
also
світиться,
have
у вас
technical
демонстрація
problems.
Так,
світиться.
видно
No, Can
переключення
you see my
слайдів?
slides? Can you see the slides changing?
Так?
Yes
А
or no?
верхню нажміть демонстрація загальний екран.
Well, just to
Так.
Щось
press the
змінилось?
upper button.
Щас.
Anything
Чекаємо.
changed?
Ні.
Just a second.
Добре,
Ні,
тоді
нічого не
працюємо
змінилося.
далі, бо у
Тоді
мене
так.
Okay,
відступ довгий.
let's move on,
І я
because I
зараз
have
трачу
a
просто час.
a long briefing and will not just
Uh,
be willing to
so-
spoil the time on that.
Yeah, so I am sincerely grateful to the Indiana University, Sarah Phillips, Svetlana Melnik, and all the organizers of Taras Shevchenko Annual Conference for the opportunity to present the results of my study today. So, for a long time in the Ukrainian army, the problem of women's military uniforms was considered as a part of a broader problem of beauty. The fair sex war is not a reason for a woman to look ugly, and other similar expressions are still deeply rooted in the consciousness of Ukrainian society even now, in times of full-scale war. Of course, since 24th of February 2022, there have been significantly fewer of them in public discourse, but this phenomenon hasn't disappeared altogether. On the slide, you see a screenshot of the post on the official Facebook page of the Army Aviation Command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, published in December 2023. The caption to the photo reads as follows: "Not the weaker sex, the beauty that kills. Female helicopter pilot of UA Army Aviation." Thus, even when covering the presence of women in such responsible positions in the army, the Ukrainian military environment still fails to move away from the prescriptive beauty norm, the social phenomenon where women feel social pressure to intensively pursue beauty. In my opinion, such actions represent an attempt to install traditional views of femininity and masculinity in the military sphere, adapting them to the current needs of the state in the war, but without violating the general principles of gender relations in society. Similar phenomena have been recorded in previous armed conflicts, and I consider them as one of the reasons for the marginalized position of women in the army. However, during the Russian-Ukrainian war, there has been progress in this area since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and I will demonstrate this in example of media coverage of providing women with military uniforms. So, the source base for this study is Ukrainian RIA and military digital media. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, the military uniform is one of the attributes of a person who is defined as a soldier by the state, society, and army. However, in the case of Ukrainian women that have joined the army, the situation is not so clear. According to statistics, 5,000 of them are currently serving on the front line, and they are still provided with the male field uniforms, underwear, and shoes at the state level, which do not fit due to the characteristics of the female figure. Also, the testing of female field uniforms has finally reached the finish line in 2023. At the same time, even though the war has been going on since 2014, and women have also been involved in it from the very beginning, the state has been improving mainly women's everyday and ceremonial uniforms before February 2022. This fact in itself is one of the pieces of evidence that at the state level, women are perceived primarily as decorations for the military team, not as full-fledged soldiers for whom it is primarily important that their clothes allow them to comfortably perform their duties in the rear and on the front line. And this is why before the full-scale invasion, the vast majority of materials in civilian and military media concerned the improvement of ceremonial and everyday military uniforms for women, and not on the principles that would ensure comfort during service. For example, in November 2019, the Army Inform website published news about the results of testing of women's everyday uniform in the armed forces of Ukraine. It emphasized that specialists of the main Directorate for Development and Support of the Armed Forces of Ukraine have once again confirmed the old and good truth. How many women, so many opinions. You can't please everyone, especially when it comes to clothes or heels. This implies that not all service women were satisfied with the changes in uniforms. But instead of trying to find out the reasons for this and find a balance between functionality and appearance, the authors of the article impose a biased attitude towards service women, forming a stereotype of their alleged innate capriciousness in the selection of clothing, which shouldn't be taken into account. Instead, when the reader gets to the details of what innovations have been implemented, it becomes clear that the designers primarily aimed to make the uniforms beautiful, not comfortable. Most problems arose with shoes because different age groups like different models. The younger ones ask for high heels, while the older ones ask for the opposite. At the same time, options for shoes without heels, which are more comfortable for everyday use, were not considered at all. Then the authors of the article contradict themselves, stating that they allegedly didn't receive any comments from the service women about the new pants. However, the next paragraph reveals that in pants, thanks to the darts in the back, there are no pockets anymore. They emphasize the female figure became a little narrower. However, some women notice that pockets are still needed because they have a habit of putting something there. Thus, the comments about the need for pockets are not taken into account. The main thing is that the pants emphasize the female figure. The article also uses the expression beauties in uniform. Soon after, article citing Army Inform appeared in the rear media that almost completely repeated the content of the message, but without the beauties in uniform and you can't please everyone. However, we couldn't find any criticism that the design of the new uniform demonstrates the priority of beauty over functionality. It is worth noting that this series of materials didn't cause much resonance in society. The same cannot be said about the events of the summer of 2021. On the eve of the parade dedicated to the 30th anniversary of Ukraine's independence, in which a separate women's group or box was scheduled to participate, it was decided that the service women would walk along the cobblestones of central Kyiv streets in a ceremonial uniform, including high-heeled shoes. A report of this provoked a flurry of criticism and discussion of the problem in society and the media. In many ways, the scandal was political, as it was a part of the confrontation between the presidential party Sluga Narodu and the party Європейська Солідарність, led by former President Petro Poroshenko. The media covered in detail the reaction of the political establishment, as well as the communication of officials from the armed forces and the Ministry of Defense on the situation. The latter communicated rather poorly, adding after references to the order establishing unified samples of women's uniforms, the phrase that this year Ukrainian servicewomen will be marching in uniform, beautiful and strong. So once again, beauty is seen as a woman's attribute and duty. The armed forces of Ukraine and the Military Institute of the Kyiv National University attempted to shift the blame onto the servicewomen themselves, saying that 99% of them wanted to wear a ceremonial uniform. In the end, the Ministry of Defense hastily replaced the high-heeled shoes with lace-up boots, which turned out to be somewhat more comfortable for the Prussian march. In this context, it is important to note that the rear media not only covered the official positions of the authorities, but also published materials that covered the position of the servicewomen themselves, often opposite to the official version. For example, a critical article by a soldier and former journalist, Valeria Burlakova, in which she called the existing samples of ceremonial uniform a relic of the Soviet past. And in the same article, Burlakova cited comments from other servicewomen who said that they would be more comfortable in the field uniforms because otherwise it seems that women in the army are still seen as staff hounds. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the general principles of covering the issue of providing women with military uniforms have changed significantly. First, the issue of rapid development of field uniforms is now dominant. Secondly, the main focus is on its convenience. The need to create field uniforms to enable the effective performance of tasks on duty rather than for beauty is now clearly articulated by both the authorities and journalists covering topics related to this issue. However, some materials from Ukrainian civilian and military media still cannot be called acceptable. For example, Daria Durova's article of 22nd of December 2022 in Obozrevатель about the exhibition of women's military uniforms is accompanied by a glamorous photo of women in uniform, with hairstyles and hair decorations in the shape of yellow and blue flowers, which are the colors of the national Ukrainian flag. Again, the photo refers to beauty as a female attribute. The photo is not from the exhibition, and the hair ornament is not an element of the women's field uniform projects. The appropriateness of such a photo is highly questionable. At the same time, this article presents real photographs from the exhibition with real service women, which have little in common with the glamorous photo at the beginning. The question of why one of them wasn't chosen as the main illustration for the article remains open. At the same time, it is worth noting that in general, the text of the article emphasizes that military uniforms that match a woman's anthropometric data are necessary because they increase the effectiveness of a servicewoman. Another article published by Obozrevатель on the activities of the Armed Women Now project, which aims to develop women's field uniforms, justifiably criticized the authorities for taking care predominantly of the attractiveness of female uniforms in the previous years. However, the introductory part of this article is unpleasantly surprising. As it states, war is not a woman's business. However, this statement is true only if we are talking not about Ukrainian women. This sentence is a demonstration of elementary illiteracy and another attempt to impose a gender stereotype, as history and the present know many examples of women's mass service in the military, including combat positions. It is also important to emphasize that there is a striking difference in the rhetoric of the military media Army Inform regarding the women's military uniforms compared to how this issue was covered before the war. From statements that women are capricious when it comes to choosing clothes and their opinion can be ignored, there has been an evolution to the updated version of the women's summer field suit, took into account all the wishes of service women. So to save the time, I will not read this quote. Yes, so when describing the characteristics of the products, the emphasis is no longer on beauty, but on compliance with the physiological characteristics of women. So we can see on the slide the quote, which is an evidence of this. So also the same emphasis was placed on the convenience of the field uniform for women to perform tasks in the service. In the articles,
1 minute.
yes, in the articles that covering the stages of its creation, but as we can see, they still contain inappropriate photos, and it's the same photos that I criticized on the example of the previous article. So conclusions, I will try to say them like briefly, but if there is no time, I will send it into the chat. So in general, the media discourse on women in military service has changed several times since 2014, as well as the state's policy on the organization of military service of women. The most fundamental changes in the media discourse were implemented after 24th of February 2022. However, Ukrainian rear and military media do not yet have a consistent practice of covering the problems of women in the military in a feminist context. In the context of coverage of the problem of providing women with military uniforms before the full-scale invasion, it was typical to emphasize the femininity and attractiveness of service women in the everyday and ceremonial uniforms, and not pay enough attention to the development of field uniforms for them. Beauty is still considered as an attribute of a woman in the military, and this idea continues to be imposed through public discourse. Even so, these phenomena have decreased since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. It is still too early to talk about the entrenchment of gender-neutral practices in the constructing images of women in the military service in the rear and military media. I would say now this has taken on more subtle forms, but it is no less harmful to achieving equal status for women and men in the army. Of course, more fundamental conclusions about the coverage of military service of Ukrainian women and the formation of their image in the media can be drawn based on a study of a wider range of aspects related to the topic. But in my opinion, the Russian-Ukrainian war demonstrates the need to change the concept of state defense that currently exists in Ukraine. Old approaches based mainly on the forced mobilization of male population, traditional distribution of gender roles where men are defenders and women are those who need protection must be changed. Pressing issue is the development of effective and differentiated principles of involving the population in the defense of the state, where in particular the gender division of responsibilities should be replaced by the principle that every member of society contributes to the defense of the country according to their physical and mental capabilities and abilities. Also historically states that recruited women for military service during previous huge armed conflicts were characterized by a return to old gender norms after their end, the exclusion of women veterans from those to be honored, and the narrowing of their rights and opportunities to continue military service in peacetime. Only time will tell whether the Ukrainian army will be able to change its patriarchal nature. A very important indicator of this will be the post-war policy of the government and the armed forces of Ukraine towards women. Thank you for attention.
Mrs. Zalietok, thank you very much for your speech. А ми продовжуємо, шановні колеги.
And we are going on, dear colleagues.
Запрошую до слова
Now I
пана
give the floor to Mr.
Януша Панченка,
Janusz
використання
Panchenko
ромської теми в
about the
контексті
use of the
російського
Roma
вторгнення в
theme in the
Україну.
context of the Russian invasion
Будь
of
ласка.
Ukraine. Please. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation and for the introduction speech. I do hope that I can show my slideshow, and I hope that my presentation is working. Could you please tell, do you see my presentation? Yes, we do. Okay, thank you.
Не чуємо вас.
We do not hear you.
Януше, ти де?
Janusz, where are you?
Є звук зараз чи немає?
Do you have sound now?
Януш, ми тебе чуємо.
Janusz, we hear you. Okay. So the topic of my presentation is the use of the Romani theme in the information space in the context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In fact, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the Russo-Ukrainian war has lots of dimensions and sub-dimensions. It's not only physical, tangible, or the countering of Ukrainian army against the Russian army. It is also the information countering and emotional countering, and including the physical one, of course. And one of these dimensions is the inclusion of the topic of ethnic national minorities into this information and agenda and in the context of the war. So since the first days of the Russian invasion, we could see different pieces of news connected with and emphasized on the national minorities in Ukraine and in Russia. For instance, we could see the information since the first days about the awards given to the Ukrainians of Azerbaijani origins as heroes of Ukraine, about the mobilization of Tajik people to the Russian army, evacuation of Turks from Kherson region to Turkey, and one of these dimensions in the context of the national and ethnical points is the Romani topic, Roma topic. So since the first days, the 27th of February 2022, we had the first information reason, which was the first one and is still the biggest one, and it really influenced the information agenda of Russian invasion and Russo-Ukrainian war. That was the event about the Roma who stole a Russian tank in Kherson region, in village of Lyubimivka. This piece of news was widely disseminated since the first days, and it was not only at the national level, but beyond Ukraine as well. It was well disseminated in Europe, not only among the Roma people, but among all the population. Even the president of Poland, Andrzej Duda, tweeted about this event in his Twitter account. After that, we could see similar news. For instance, the Roma stole a tank, then there was the news the Roma stole a Russian missile, then the Roma stole a horse of Kadyrov, and so on and so forth in this context. So this topic was a kind of a continuation to the tank being stolen, but in a different context. Something has changed, but the context was the same. So these events, especially the fact that the Roma stole a tank, has become the national meme. And as of now, it's the national Ukrainian merge, because we can have different patriotic songs devoted to the fact of the tank being stolen, attire or clothes, dishes, and even tabletop games, lots of things. And this piece of news really was disseminated widely, especially even that the citizens of Spain, the Spanish Roma people, also knew about this case. So, since the first days, the Roma people were already included into the information agenda of the Russo-Ukrainian war. It was done maybe not accidentally, but still since that moment, the Roma people are becoming one of the central ethnic minorities in the context of Russian invasion. And through Roma people, the Ukrainian side is beginning to promote some of its narratives, which I'd like to tell you about later. So the Roma people were chosen in this way to promote, one of the ways to promote information. From the Russian side, they have selected the Chechen people, Kadyrov people. If you remember, since the first days, there were lots of information that the Kadyrov people, the Chechen people are coming, and it was the kind of intimidation ways that those are the most cruel, the strongest Russian warriors, and they had lots of representation online. Not really, but more online about the Chechen people from Kadyrov troops. And Russia was trying to promote their narratives through this ethnic minority like Chechens. But from the Ukrainian side, those were the Roma. But what's the difference? The difference is that the Chechen is the privileged population of Russia with the high status and with many privileges. But the Roma people, I would say, are the most discriminated ethnic minority of Ukraine, the most isolated, and it feels the xenophobia most of all. In one of the patriotic songs in YouTube, it has the name The Gypsy Tank. The author of this song shows the topic of information countering and resistance, and he does that in a funny way, as if the Roma are against the Chechen in the information space. So when this topic was used by the Ukrainian side, Russia, a bit later, with some delays, was started to try to respond to this topic and to create information ideas as a response to Ukraine. And often those were just the similar, really the same news. For instance, on the 27th of February, we said that the Roma stole the Russian tank. In several months, the Russian media showed the piece of news as if the Roma stole an American, a NATO tank, Abrams. But in fact, this piece of news was never widely disseminated, either in Russia or in Ukraine or in Europe. It was born at some Russian media, propaganda one. It was born and died there. It was not that well known after that, in comparison with the news that in Ukraine the Roma stole a Russian tank. And since that moment, we can see this countering information first, which is still going on, in the context of Roma topic. This is one of the dimensions of this war. First, in the news, they had this kind of a joking approach, like they stole a tank, a horse, and then they stole Putin. All of that was kind of an innocent context. But then we had a piece of news that Russian soldiers in Kakhovka have entered into the Gypsy or Roma People's Center, and then first they were in the posts of the opposition Russians. Lyubimivka, by the way, is the village close to Kakhovka. And in some of the Russian media, oppositional and others, they wrote that it's a revenge of Russian soldiers for the stolen tank, because it took place in the same region. Another case, which took place in several days, that in Lviv, the Roma, the women Roma, were tied to the pole, and so they disseminated the pictures on the internet. So the Russian, pro-Russian media, including Kazakh ones, and some of the European countries even, used this case to show that there are Nazis in Ukraine by the ethnic origin, that people are prosecuted and killed. And this news was also really covered a lot. Not that much as the tank case, but still it was represented in many international media. So this was, in fact, a kind of a counteraction, because Russia was trying to show that Ukrainians torture the Roma people, and the Ukrainian side said that they are looters, that there is no point what's their origin, that it doesn't matter what's their origin, and that in this way, the people were just dealing like that with the looters. In fact, there were lots of cases like that in the beginning of the war, when the looters were tied up to the pole with duct tape. Then since then, there was a kind of this clash, information clash in this context. After the tied up Roma, there was the information that Russian military killed 28 Roma in Donetsk region. This information is still not verified, and we don't know whether they were really killed and who they were, but this topic was widely used in the European media, in the Ukrainian media, to show the xenophobic manner of nature of Russian state and the army through the topic of Roma people. And in the end of 2022, there was the verified case that the Russian army murdered a Romani family in Makiyivka. Well, I don't know whether it's a village or a settlement closer to Donetsk. It's a town, it's the part of Donetsk. Okay, the town of Makiyivka. And this topic is also used. This one is occupied for 9 years at the moment, and it was under control of the Russian army. And in reality, how did it happen? Those were the Wagner Russian soldiers who killed the Romani family, including the children. But the Russian media had to explain that in a different way and to accuse the Ukrainians. So they invented that those were Ukrainian soldiers captured who ran away and killed the Romani family. The Ukrainian side showed this information in a different way, that the Russian soldiers, the Wagner soldiers, killed the Romani family. So here we can see the clash for the discrimination of Roma. In the first case, the Roma stole the tank, the horse, then Putin. So here we have the clash of discrimination, where we have the worse attitude towards Roma, where we have more negative cases, murders or violence against the Roma people. The only case where the Russians really had the reason to disseminate is when the Roma people were tied up to the pole in Lviv. Then there was one more dimension emerging of this topic, and here we need to say that at the stage it was not only about the state Ukrainian media which published that. The Roma people themselves were involved in the topic and started to promote the cases connected with the Roma people, the negative cases with Russians, or the distortion of reality, the attitude towards the Roma people, which could be real or in fact fake, by the state media and by the Roma people themselves. The same in Ukraine. The Roma people, the Roma organizations have been involved in that, including the Roma channels of communications and media. Janos, you have 1 minute left. Okay, give me 2. So the main topic, which was in fact developing the participation of Roma in the war, in the Ukrainian or in the Russian army. The Ukrainian Roma were always a step ahead. They did something which then the Russian Roma or the Russian state was trying to respond to. And the Roma of Ukraine were widely disseminating the idea that the Ukrainian Roma warriors were described in Deutsche Welle, the Irish Times, the Brussels Times, and in bigger Ukrainian media like Ukrainska Pravda. So, as for the Russian Roma taking part in the war, we don't have any information about that because there is no interest. There is not a single big interview about the Roma person who would be a Russian soldier. There are some short videos, as if it was the confirmation fact that they are there, but we don't see any context that they are courageous in the Russian army. And toxicity of the Russian invasion and the Russian army is, of course, transforming into the context of the participation of Roma people in the Russian army, and in this context, it lost. So the information channels which were used for that, for instance, beside from the Ukrainian side are the Ukrainian media and foreign media, and the communications channels through the social media. So it led to the really upscaled amount. In Russian, it is only social media. So those channels can be different. If Ukrainian Roma are for the population of Ukraine to confirm that we are here, we are also protecting Ukraine, our Roma people are also dying at war and are helping a lot. Just so if Ukraine were really Nazi, there wouldn't be any Roma in the Ukrainian army. And the same as in the Russian media. We are supporting the Russian state, they say, we support Putin. So this is a kind of propaganda context. The readiness to support them in Russia. So short conclusions are like that. All of those events led to the consequences that the xenophobia index to Roma in Ukraine decreased because in 2021 it was 5.35 and now it is already to the right 4.75. In 2 years, the participation of Roma people and the information highlighting of their activity led to the increase of xenophobia against Roma people in Ukraine. And we can discuss that in the discussion more.
Виступ. У нас є 10 хвилин. Передаємо слово нашому дискутанту Миколі Гаманюку. Будь ласка, пане Миколо.
Добрий вечір.
Okay, hello, greetings. Greetings, everyone. Greetings, the participants. And greetings, the panelists. I thank you for their very interesting briefings. On the one hand, the topic of the briefings was very diverse. And one might think that, you know, there's people absolutely different, so let them gather into one panel. But as I read the briefings, as I read I will be able to say that this panel, human and war, even though it kind of joined the unjoinable, because for most of the consumers of the information, the war in a global scale is primarily all about the events on the battlefield. It's all about the combat operations, the shellings of Ukrainian cities. It's when there's blood, with there's explosions, so everything as related to weapons and its consequences. And well, you know, consuming information, people might not be aware that the war has multiple dimensions, and it could be that people engaged in war, they have a gender, they have a nationality, they have a ethnic background, speciality, etc. So today's panel clearly showed this multi-dimensional aspects of the war in Ukraine, waged by the Russia against Ukraine. So some of the consequences the war has in terms of the society, so how the war impacts the society, the social structure, the values, So how this impacts on different things related or not directly related to the war. As for the first panelist, I would like to extend a word of gratitude to Mykhailo for running such a comprehensive work and providing a lot of information on motivation for collaborationists. And, you know, in many cases, it's hard to identify the dominating affect because financial benefits and career progression, they're interrelated, intertwined. But let me stay as kind of a lawyer, because the first panelist would rather taking kind of a prosecutor style statement. I'm surely I do not support the collaborators, but I wanted to say that in many cases, as a person who once survived the occupation, this word voluntary, it's kind of conditional. So in many cases, you would really need to identify to what degree was that collaboration voluntary or not. I'm talking about both the educational workers as well as the business representatives, local self-government authorities. I mean, to which degree it was indeed a voluntary one. And I believe that after the end of the war, we will have some additional information, I guess, that involves Mykhailo, who might allow us to take a look at from the different perspective to that aspect. I have the following question to Mykhailo. His briefing was all about indicators, but do you have a quantitative indicators, more of a scale of this phenomena? Because one might think that collaborators in the educational field covered majority of the people in occupation. So I want to know about the scales of collaborationism in the field of education. As for the relocation, it's also a very important topic, relocation of the business. A profound briefing, or rather research that was done with the photos, with the quantitative figures, with some personal stories. And truly, thanks to the method of oral stories, we could see some barriers, difficulties, and which are faced by the Ukrainian entrepreneurs in the process of the relocation. But what I still kind of lacked, and maybe because Larysa had not enough time because of technical problems, what companies were they? Based on her photos, these were primarily industrial production facilities. But what about the relocation of the service type of enterprises, or how the relocation was organized in the agricultural business? Because I'm coming from the Kherson region myself. So what about the agricultural companies? I mean, maybe Larysa has researched any examples of relocation of those businesses offering their services in the agricultural field. As for the briefing by Nataliia, I was also impressed with the materials and how she approaches this matter. And you know, some matters might be considered not that important in the informational field, and particularly, well, one might think that these are secondary compared to blood and shellings and the war. But looking at her case, really, the war changes the society, and because in the gender dimension, those changes, you know, might root in the society, as Nataliia has mentioned. But I have a question. The following one. I'm not a military expert, but Since I know the example of the Second World War, the military industry, including the production of the military uniform, whenever there is a long conflict, the military production that tends to be kind of as unified as possible, you know, not to overload the industry with kind of additional specs, but to produce everything as fast as possible. So a question to Nataliia, maybe the solution in this situation, not in the way by doing a separate type of uniform for female personnel, but maybe to make this uniform more kind of common, more standard, so that the light industry would be, you know, would be easier to produce, because there's this style, this unisex style, there's a neutral type of uniforms. Maybe that could be the solution, so that a design of a gender neutral uniform, maybe that could solve a problem. And the fourth panelist, Janusz, well, I am personally acquainted with him and with Mykhailo as well. We're coming from the same cities. Yes, I was born in Kakhovka, so this is where the tank was stolen, so I can show you some of the places. So yes, indeed, it's a very important aspect, the ethnical aspect of the war. And as was already mentioned in the very beginning of this briefing, there could be multiple dimensions, like there's legionnaires in the Ukrainian armed forces, which was mentioned on the previous briefings, and there's different ethnical groups, the topic of migration of different groups. It's worth mentioning the multiple dimensions are covered by the briefing by Janusz, as policy, the true stories, the internet domain, there's then the official statements and discourses. But I do have rather a compliment or a comment with the Tide Roma people. This topic of tide looters, that was very widespread on the occupied territories. And I know multiple facts from media, and when the looters were tied, I mean, and they were not Romas, so when they were tying the looters, they didn't care whose nationality were they or what was the ethics. So I'm not saying whether you should or you should not tie the looters, but still, we should point that there shouldn't be an impression that only the Roma people were tied up. No, that's not the case. And the question to Janusz. So, what do you think? Why the news about the tank that was stolen by the Ukrainian Roma? Why it was kind of widespread, and the same news about Romas who stole the U.S. tank? That news, well, did not become very popular. So, yes, thank you, Mykhailo. Dear colleagues, we're out of time, so maybe 1 minute for everyone. And then we'll have a lecture by Professor Plokhy. So my response to the question of Mr. Muniak, I would like to say that unfortunately there's no exact number of the teachers who turned into collaborators. So we don't have. Talking about the Kherson region, 10% of the teachers, that's according to my own data, so around 1,000 out of 11,000, they participated in different courses of Russia. How many of them started working for Russians? I don't know. Most of the collaborations, they took place in Crimea, Donetsk and Luhansk, because people, they didn't know how to act, and then the live clearly showed what could be. the point. Hopefully I answered your question. The only response we will get from the history is that when prosecutors will learn all of the cases and the General Prosecutor's Office is currently considering over 6,000 criminal cases. Some of them were initiated against the teachers, but how many of them will be turned to court and how many cases will be proven cases of collaborators? Currently, there's only 3 teachers out of all Ukraine were prosecuted by court and were sentenced by court. Thank you. Colleagues, let's take 1 minute, one after another, please. Larysa, I think you were the next. Or I can. Okay, Nataliia, why? Well, let's start with you and then Larysa. Okay, as for the uniform, I understand your question. Well, first, the state has to officially recognize women as the one who that deserve to have their own field uniform or battle dress uniform. There's many aspects related to the types of the female service uniforms that were already tested and set for production. And now some of the women are saying that there's a bad quality samples, which is weird. An alternative could be, when the battle dress uniform is adapted to every soldier, but I don't know how Ukraine will be able to deal with that, but there's certain difficulties or differences between men and women. So it could be that you can, because the men have larger shoulders than the women have differences with legs. So there could be, you take one piece of military uniform and you use overcoat of one size and trousers of the other size. But then, it's a big question whether Ukraine can be using that many sewers to make sure that the military uniform is properly adapted to the peculiarities of the women body. Larysa, I wanted to say that indeed, some of my slides covers the agriculture. Well, evidently, it's hard to, relocate together with land, but maybe I can show you the list. Well, Larysa, it's better to explain something with words. I just wanted to demonstrate it so that you could see. Unfortunately, I can't do that. Maybe, well, today is the bad day for technologies. Oh, well. Okay, so I wanted to say that I have only one representative of the agricultural sector, and she is very grateful to the Canadian project to help with the relocation. And they help her with with the support, and she's the co-owner of the farm. And they were relocated, if I'm not mistaken, from the Kherson region. Out of 80 enterprises, 5 enterprises that involved with food, 2 enterprises providing services, water supply, and waste recycling, 2 companies. So these are the companies dealing with the environmental aspects. Then retail sales, 6 enterprises. So there's many enterprises of different types, but processing type, that's 72% of all the sampling. And we would really like to know how the business owners are taking care of their employees. And that is why the sampling was, well, it had some points as the basis. It was designed to learn how the businesses are taking care of their employees. And whenever we're talking about small enterprises, well, surely there's not too many employees. But as you can see on the final slide, people are saying that they will return to Mariupol, and that what was told by the business owner. She produces children's toys. Thank you, Larysa. Thank you, thank you for your answer. Now, Janusz, please. Okay, so thank you for the question. So why this information about Roma's stealing Russian tank was so popular, and why the information of Roma stealing American tank was not that popular? Well, maybe that case, I mean, stealing of the tank, it took place on the occupied territory. That was the first days of the war. Kakhovka was occupied already, and the people, I mean, Roma and Ukrainians, they were very emotional. And, you know, amidst the occupation, that news had a very significant emotional impact on the people. I guess this is why, well, look, one of the reasons why that was happening, because people were in occupation, and that was something that could raise their level of morale. As for Russians, well, the people were feeling nothing. I mean, there was nothing happening on their own territory, so they were not feeling themselves as part of what was happening, because they, I mean, didn't realize what was happening. Well, we were feeling this, and we had some emotions attached to that. Okay, now, Mr. Mykhailo, let's kind of make a summary, and then we'll move on. Are you happy with the answers? Absolutely, thank you. Okay, so thank you, Mykhailo. Sarah, Svetlana, I have finished my panel.
Thank you very much, Mykhailo. Thank
Yeah,
to all of our wonderful speakers on this really important panel. I agree with Mykhailo. At first glance, it looks like, how do these papers fit together? But in the end, you brought them together beautifully, and I think we saw lots of interesting and overlapping themes.